For nearly 5 centuries, historians, physicians, and scholars have been captivated by the grotesque final days of one of England's most powerful, most infamous, and most terrifying monarchs, King Henry VIII. He who broke with the Pope, who dissolved monasteries, who defied God and man alike. How did such a titan of power fall? And not merely in spirit or reign, but physically, spectacularly, horrifically. The truth, as ghastly as it is uncertain, continues to fascinate and revolt. This is the true story, built upon historical records, eyewitness accounts, medical speculation, and the stench of death, of the horrible end of Henry VIII. A mighty beginning. Henry Tudor was born on June 28, 1491, into a new dynasty forged by his father, Henry VII, after the bloody Wars of the Roses. A golden prince, blessed with height, strength, and unmatched charisma, Henry VIII ascended the throne at the age of 17. A Venetian ambassador once described him as extremely handsome, the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on. His early reign was marked by athletic tournaments, philosophical debates, and a magnetic aura of virility and majesty. But this luminous rise was destined for decay. Behind the silk and steel, a monster was taking shape, not just in politics, but in flesh. The Fall. In January 1536, during a jousting tournament at Greenwich, Henry's fortune shifted violently. He was 44. A horrific fall crushed him beneath his horse, leaving him unconscious for 2 hours. Though he survived, his right leg was shattered and would never heal. What began as a wound would become a symbol of his internal rot. An open ulcer developed, one that oozed, festered, and reeked with the odor of death. The court, bound by fear, endured the stench without flinching. Any expression of disgust could be considered treason. Some suspect that the trauma from the fall also caused a brain injury, the effects of which would reverberate through his decisions: paranoia, cruelty, rage. It is no coincidence that soon after, he executed his second wife, Anne Boleyn, on charges now widely believed to be fabricated. A body in decline. Over the next decade, Henry's physical decline accelerated. Once lean and athletic, his waist ballooned from 89 to over 130 centimeters. He eventually weighed over 180 kilograms. He could not walk unaided. His palaces were retrofitted with pulley systems to hoist him between chambers. The once proud prince had become a heaving, bleeding shadow. The ulcer on his leg grew worse, to the point that bone was visible through decomposing tissue. The smell was so overpowering, so nauseating, that some courtiers fainted merely from his approach. The stench preceded him like a herald of death. His medical treatments, primitive by modern standards, only hastened his decay. Physicians applied arsenic and mercury mixtures, burned his flesh with hot irons, and drained his blood in massive quantities. These cures did little but compound his agony. Madness and monstrosity. As his flesh rotted, so did his mind. Henry became consumed by paranoia. He saw traitors in every corridor, conspiracies in every whisper. Close friends and loyal advisors fell under suspicion and met the headsman's axe. In 1546, just 9 days before his death, he ordered the execution of Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, one of England's most brilliant noblemen. His obsession with security bordered on the deranged. Every dish was tasted by multiple servants. Utensils were examined for poison. He feared even his own children. His final wife, Catherine Parr, became more nurse than queen, tending to a man who could no longer stand without screaming in pain. The final agonies. By the winter of 1546 to 1547, Henry VIII was no longer king in any real sense. He was a cadaver waiting for the clock to run out. Gangrene had taken hold of his leg. His body swelled with fluids. Fever racked him. He suffered strokes, or possibly embolisms, that left him incoherent. The smell of his decay filled the royal apartments. Courtiers clutched perfume-soaked rags to their faces. Even his physicians dared not speak of death, for to predict the king's passing was treason. In delirium, he called out the names of his wives, especially Jane Seymour, the only one who had given him a son. Anne Boleyn's name also passed his lips, as if her ghost tormented him. At last, on January 28, 1547, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was summoned. Henry could no longer speak. Asked whether he died in the faith, he squeezed the archbishop's hand. It was his final act. Then, silence. But the horror did not end. Death beyond death. Due to his massive size, embalmers faced an unprecedented challenge. They removed his innards, stuffed his body with herbs, and attempted to seal his bloated corpse in a special coffin. It wasn't enough. As the body decomposed over the next days, it began to leak. While resting in the chapel of Sion Abbey en route to Windsor, a most dreadful event occurred. Contemporary accounts claim that cadaveric fluid seeped through the coffin onto the floor, where it was lapped up by stray dogs. Chroniclers recorded this event as a sign from God. A monarch who considered himself above divine law, whose cruelty had marked his reign, was reduced to a rotting carcass defiled by animals. The state funeral took place on February 16th. The coffin reeked so intensely that mourners had to hold cloths to their faces. Yet the ceremony proceeded, grand and solemn, as though the man within had not ended in filth and humiliation. The disease debate. What truly killed Henry VIII? Theories abound, none conclusive. He almost certainly suffered from morbid obesity, type 2 diabetes, suggested by his frequent urination and ulcerations, gout, evident in swollen, painful joints, Cushing's disease, explaining mood swings, obesity, and muscle weakness, hypertension and congestive heart failure, sepsis from his ulcerated leg, possibly stroke, aneurysm, or pulmonary embolism. But none of these can be proven. Even if his body were exhumed and subjected to DNA testing, no definitive answer may emerge. Henry's demise was likely the sum of all these afflictions, a body and a life ravaged by indulgence, trauma, and time. Legacy of flesh and power. Henry VIII reigned for 38 years. He left behind a fractured church, a diminished treasury, and a legacy bathed in blood and reform. His only son, Edward VI, died young. His daughter Mary I tried to reverse his Protestant reforms, but it was Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman Henry had beheaded, who would shape the golden age of England. The grandeur of Henry's portraits, his assertive postures and bejeweled garb, stand in stark contrast to the grotesque end he met. His reign began in glory and ended in pus. A moral to rot by. Henry VIII believed himself above all, above the Pope, above Parliament, above the will of others. But he could not escape death, and his death was a reminder that power, no matter how divine it claims to be, cannot shield a man from disease, decay, and the dogs that lick your corpse. John Donne wrote, "Death comes equally to us all, and makes us equal when it comes." Never was this truer than in the case of Henry VIII. He who imagined himself godlike ended as a pile of rotting flesh, bloated, bursting, and bleeding through his coffin. The king who changed the world could not change the one law that governs us all: that flesh fails, and that death makes mockery of kings.